Hey friends, tonight we step into the strict, elegant, and often merciless reality of feudal Japan. A world ruled by samurai honor, rigid traditions, and punishments sharper than their swords. Picture cherry blossoms drifting through the air, poetry that could melt your heart, and a lifestyle so demanding most of us wouldn't survive until lunch. Before we dive in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, only if you actually enjoy this kind of content. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where everyone's watching from. Now, lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some gentle background noise, and let's slip into tonight's story together. In feudal Japan, your life isn't a choice, it's assigned the moment you're born, shaped by ancestors you'll never meet. Your role isn't a dream, it's a lifelong contract. Born into a samurai clan? Congrats, you now live for the sword, the bow, and 1,000 rules about posture in front of your master. Born a farmer? Well, enjoy decades knee-deep in rice paddies. Your kids will inherit the mud too. There are no resumes, no startups. You're either warrior, peasant, craftsman, or merchant. And once stamped into place, you stay there. Trying to climb higher isn't ambition, it's a crime. You don't climb the ladder here, you kneel to it. And then there were the Eta, the untouchables. They handled death, executioners, tanners, butchers. Society needed them desperately yet treated them like invisible shadows, ghosts who kept the world turning. Even within classes, hierarchies twisted further. Say you're a merchant, you have money, sure, but in feudal Japan that put you near the bottom. Why? Because earning without sweating was considered dishonorable. Too much success? Suspicious. Meanwhile, peasants paid such crushing taxes on their rice that starving was almost expected. Hide a little grain to survive? That's treason. And yes, executions were common. As a samurai, you had prestige, but lived constantly on edge, terrified of disrespecting your master, ancestors, tailor, or even your own sword by something as simple as sneezing at the wrong moment. Women fared no better. Whatever your class, freedom stopped at your father's word. You married who you were told, served who you must, and prayed you'd at least be allowed to learn poetry. From the moment you opened your eyes, you were handed a costume and a script, and shoved onto history's stage whether you wanted it or not. It was refined, poetic, and suffocatingly inescapable. And that's before breakfast. Cleanliness? You might imagine dirt and grit, but hygiene in Japan was serious, almost sacred. Sounds nice, until winter arrives. Morning meant splashing icy water from a well onto your face and arms, shivering like your ancestors were punishing you for existing. Soap? Rare, and usually made of ash or rice bran, smelling like a monk's cruel experiment. In villages with a bathhouse, the place became the community hub, fire-heated tubs, no privacy at all, and yes, you bathed beside neighbors, in-laws, and your landlord. Silence, nudity, and polite pretending that it wasn't awkward. You scrub first, soak second. Dirtying the shared water? Social death. Without a bathhouse, you washed piecemeal, brushing teeth with salt, scrubbing with twigs, airing out your clothes. Not to look stylish, but because being unclean was seen as disgraceful both to body and spirit. If you happened to be a samurai, multiply the stress by 10. Your master could inspect you at any moment. A chipped nail? Shameful. A robe folded wrong? Disrespect. Smelling bad while bowing? That bow might be your last. Women were expected to smell like blossoms and discipline itself. Bathing wasn't just hygiene, it was ritual. Skincare was handled with soldier-like precision, and hair was shaped into elaborate styles that consumed hours. Also, you could grind rice and still look like nobility. Yes, Japan was spotless. But the cost? Freezing water, endless grooming, and the eternal dread that someone was silently judging the cleanliness of your toes. Now imagine being born into the warrior elite, the samurai. Sounds glorious, right? Shiny swords, silk robes, poetic duels under cherry trees. But the reality? A never-ending trial. Being a samurai wasn't about swinging a blade, it was about never slipping, ever. Every breath was measured by Bushido, the way of the warrior. A code so strict your great-grandfather would feel guilty for you. Your life wasn't yours. It belonged to your daimyo, your lord. His moods were the seasons, and you existed to serve. Displease him even slightly, and you'd rather carve out your own guts than face his disappointment. That's not a metaphor, that's seppuku, ritual suicide. You kneel, take a dagger, and, well, you know where this is going. And it wasn't rare. It was considered an honorable exit. Fail badly enough, and your master might simply hand you the blade with a nod. Training was constant: swordplay, archery, riding, tactics, calligraphy, poetry, all while holding perfect posture and wearing an expression that said, "I've never smiled in my life." Laugh too loudly? Unrefined. Show fear? Shameful. Misplace a word at tea? Dishonor. Even your clothes had to be exact, your sword spotless, your honor unbearable. Draw your blade without just cause, lose a duel, or insult the wrong superior, you didn't just lose status, you lost everything. Being a samurai wasn't about honor and glory, it was about discipline, silence, and surviving each day without sneezing at the wrong time. Armor looked impressive, but one wrong eyebrow twitch could end your legacy. Not a samurai? Then congratulations, you're a peasant. Which means your entire existence is mud, sweat, aching bones, and rice you don't even get to eat. You wake at sunrise not because you love mornings, but because the tax man doesn't sleep. You're hot, drafty, doorless, and occasionally borrowed by goats. Breakfast, if fortune smiles, is a thin rice porridge with maybe something pickled. If fortune frowns, it's a big helping of nothing with river water. Then off to the fields, which sound romantic in travel shows but are, in reality, endless swamps engineered to crush your will to live. You plant, you weed, you hope bandits skip today, and by sunset, you limp home, only to learn one ox has vanished and the village chief wants to know why your rice quota is short. Taxes never stop. Payment isn't in coins, it's in rice. And every grain feels like another drop of your life being scooped away. Your family? They eat what's left. Which usually isn't much, especially if the harvest was poor, or if your lord's teenage nephew decided to practice horseback drills by trampling straight through your rice patch. Want to file a complaint? Adorable. The only response you'll get is a whipping, banishment, or an early funeral. If fortune smiles, you might one day be named village elder. Sounds respectable, but in practice, it means people nod at your advice and then do the exact opposite. And don't even think about moving towns. Leaving without permission is illegal. You're basically a prisoner of rice paddies, complete with seasonal foot rot. Festivals? There are some. You down rough sake, shuffle in circles, and for one blissful night forget that in 4 days you'll be back knee-deep in mud. Peasants are the backbone of the economy, the reason samurai eat and lords collect taxes. But recognition? None. Rest days? Laughable. Feudal Japan thrived on sweat, generational misery, and keeping dreams permanently out of reach. And yes, you're starving. Of course you are. You've been bending, hauling, sweating, and politely not dying since sunrise. So, what's for dinner? Nothing indulgent, that's for sure. Food is fuel, not pleasure. If you're a farmer, your diet is one word: rice. Morning, noon, night, rice. On good days, actual rice. On bad days, barley dressed up as rice. Maybe a lonely turnip, a few pickled radishes if luck exists. Meat? Reserved for lords, or perhaps the unlucky chicken that mysteriously vanished after glaring at you. Fish turns up now and then, but it's usually dried, salted, and sharp enough to count as cutlery. Soup exists too, usually miso, but don't picture richness. It's more like hot salty water with 2 confused leaves floating around. Flavorful, yes, in the same way seawater is hydrating. Samurai fare is technically better, but not by much. You eat after your lord, his entourage, and anyone he's trying to impress. That means lukewarm rice, cold soup, and the immense privilege of pretending you honor to wait while watching everyone else chew. Everything's seasonal, by necessity, not choice. No freezers, no imports, no spice trade deliveries. Winter? That's just nature's polite way of telling you to fast. And if you get food poisoning? Forget doctors. The treatment is lie down and meditate on your ancestors. You'll either recover or join them. Steal food? That's not petty theft, that's a capital offense. Snatch a daimia's turnip and you'll end up as public theater. Tea exists, sure, but it's nothing like the cozy picture in your head. The tea ceremony isn't about quenching thirst, it's a performance of etiquette, precision, and quiet humility, where drinking the tea is the least important part. So yes, meals are reverent, polite, and deeply ritualized. But in practice, they're tiny, bland, and usually include one crunchy mystery object you're afraid to identify. And don't dare complain, unless you'd like your next serving delivered through your nose. Finished eating? Good. Now comes conversation, or rather, the art of saying nothing. Someone makes a ridiculous claim. Maybe your lord mutters a truly tragic haiku. Maybe the elder misquotes a proverb. Maybe your neighbor insists his cow predicts rain. For a dangerous second, you consider correcting them. Don't. In feudal Japan, your opinion is a weapon aimed at yourself. Free speech doesn't exist, it's just a shortcut to disgrace, exile, or sudden head removal. Hierarchy ruled every word. Speak above your station, you're arrogant. Criticize your superior, you're insolent. Make a joke that falls flat? Congratulations, you're borderline treasonous. Even at home, caution rules. Sons don't interrupt fathers, wives don't correct husbands, and no one, not one soul, questions the Lord. Unless, of course, they're feeling curious about the afterlife and want a fast introduction via katana. Samurai were trained to speak with calm precision, even when burning with rage. A sharp tongue was considered worse than a dull blade. Too dangerous, too dishonorable, and likely to force someone into the awkward position of killing you just to set the record straight. Which leads us to apologies. In feudal Japan, saying sorry wasn't just a word, it was practically a performance. You bowed low. You begged. You might even scribble a sorrowful poem or offer up a symbolic gift like a bird or comb, all while hoping the other person doesn't decide you deserve a sword through the ribs anyway. And heaven forbid your tone feels casual. One wrong phrase could be taken as mockery, rebellion, or moral decay. Silence, as it turns out, is the safest sound. Even laughter is a gamble. Chuckling at the wrong moment feels insulting. Laughing with a lord might hint you think you're equals. That's how people suddenly find themselves transferred to the frozen north. Technically, free speech exists, but realistically, you nod politely, smile, and pray your thoughts stay locked inside your skull. Because in this world, loose lips don't just sink ships, they sink reputations, families, and sometimes your whole bloodline. Now, fashion. In this era, clothes aren't about self-expression. They're a billboard of rank. Your sleeves tell the world exactly how insignificant you are. Your wardrobe doesn't reflect your soul. It reflects your legal rights, your duties, and whether or not a samurai can legally cut you down for carrying the wrong sword. Samurai wear layered silks, sometimes armored, always ceremonial. Deep blues, earthen browns, a splash of crimson, every color chosen to whisper, "I have spilled blood for lesser insults." Their swords, the daisho, long and short blades together, are more than weapons. They're ID cards, and mishandling them is a shortcut to being corrected by steel. Peasants meanwhile? Cotton and dirt tones. Brown, gray, beige, cheap, practical, and proof you own one outfit, and that's it. Merchants wear better fabrics, but never flashy. Silk, yes, but muted, because looking too successful might tempt a wandering samurai to remind them of their place. Craftsmen dress sturdy, plain, and avoid attention. Standing out is considered suspicious. Women, of course, juggle impossible rules. 12 layers of symbolism, hairstyles coded by status, and kimono patterns tied to seasons. Wear the wrong color at the wrong time, and congratulations, you've just dishonored your family and started a neighborhood gossip battle. Clothing here isn't fashion. It's survival wrapped in fabric. And then comes romance, or rather, the lack of it. Forget moonlit strolls and paper lantern kisses. In feudal Japan, love is a side activity, not the main quest. Marriage is about alliances, taxes, land deals, and keeping ancestors proud. For peasants, matches are arranged by parents or the local elder. Attraction? Optional. Strong legs and good teeth mattered more. For samurai, marriages were even colder. Spouses were selected for political gain, not happiness. Maybe you get a love letter, beautifully written, of course, in poetic metaphors about seasons, delivered discreetly by a maid who knows everyone's secrets. Women? They had the least say of all. Their role was to balance obedience, appearances, and never giving neighbors a reason to gossip. A samurai's daughter might be married off by the age of 15, trained to perfect calligraphy, tea etiquette, embroidery, and, most importantly, the subtle skill of never admitting she's unhappy. Her purpose? Produce sons, pour tea flawlessly, and definitely not fall in love with the flute teacher. Romantic love, the kind with stolen glances and reckless devotion, wasn't for real life. It belonged to theater, poetry, and ghost stories where two star-crossed lovers dissolve into mist. Step outside the rules of arranged marriage, and the consequences were brutal. Adultery meant exile, disgrace, or a sword to the ribs, depending on who found out first, your spouse, your in-laws, or your lord. Even samurai households where concubines were common didn't escape the tension. It only multiplied the number of people silently disappointed with you. Yes, people still fell in love, but it was usually secret, dangerous, and timed in the absolute worst way possible. Because in feudal Japan, love wasn't outlawed, it was simply hazardous to your health. And then, there's death. In this world, death isn't some far-off idea, it's practically your shadow. You don't plan retirement, you plan your last act. For samurai, 2 swords came with an unspoken contract. Dishina demands seppuku. Lose a battle? Seppuku. Offend your lord? Seppuku. Spill sake on the daimyo's robe? Seppuku, ideally with background music and spectators. It's not private either, it's a public ritual, as meticulous as a tea ceremony, just with more blood. But peasants didn't exactly have longer life expectancies. If crops failed, you starved. If your village couldn't meet tax demands, someone's head made the point instead. Drought, plague, or raiding bandits, it didn't matter. Medicine rarely went beyond hot tea, herbs, and a determined midwife. Travel wasn't much safer. Bandits stalked country roads, and if you spent all year farming radishes, chances were someone would show up to take them at knife point. That's why maybe we'll visit next year really meant I like breathing. For women, childbirth was a gamble. Complications often ended lives, and widows of disgraced men were sometimes expected to follow their husbands into death, literally, with a dagger. And hovering over everything? Nature itself. Earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, Japan has the whole disaster catalogue. One moment you're tending rice, the next you're underwater. Insurance didn't exist, only prayer and the hope your roof stayed attached. The most chilling part? You were expected to face all of this calmly. Screaming, panicking, or clinging to life was seen as shameful. The ideal ending was to bow to death, compose a final poem, and meet your fate with stoic grace, like it was just another awkward dinner with your relatives. Now, compare that to today. Modern life tells you to find yourself and follow your dreams. In feudal Japan, yourself didn't exist, only your clan. Individualism wasn't celebrated, it was suspicious. You were a small branch on an old family tree, and your role was to avoid burning it down with selfish behavior, like falling in love with the wrong person. Your clan decided your reputation, your duties, and your destiny. Even the samurai, with all their armor and honor, weren't fighting for themselves. They fought for the family name and the fragile balance of loyalty that held their world together. Samurai don't just fight for themselves. Their loyalty runs upward, toward their daimyo, their household, and even the spirits of their ancestors. And when death comes, the best outcome is that it makes everyone above them look heroic. Because sure, dying with honor is noble, but dying in a way that slightly embarrasses your clan? That's the kind of shame relatives will be muttering about for generations. Your conduct reflects on your father. His reputation affects your grandfather's memory. And your grandfather's mistakes might still be the reason your cousin gets the cold shoulder 2 provinces away. It isn't guilt by association, it's living by association. Want to open a noodle shop because you're passionate about cooking? Cute idea. Too bad your clan raises horses, so congratulations, you're grooming hooves until further notice. Got an artistic streak? Perfect. You'll be painting the family's temple wall according to strict rules, in total silence, under someone else's supervision. And heaven help you if you stumble into scandal. A single drunken night, a spicy love poem, or an affair with the wrong person can unleash waves of shame. Your siblings might be shunned. Your mother humiliated. And somewhere down the line, a great-uncle might decide ritual disembowelment is the only way to restore family honor. In this world, you're not an individual, you're a chess piece with legs. But if you play your part correctly, bow when told, marry who you're told, you might earn the rarest of rewards, your clan actually saying your name with a hint of pride. That's the medieval Japanese version of an achievement badge. And if you've somehow survived the social rules, taxes, and endless honor traps, congratulations. Now try surviving the climate. Feudal Japan is breathtaking, snow-capped peaks, elegant forests, cherry blossoms scattering in the wind. But behind the beauty? Nature that seems personally offended by human existence. Typhoons arrive like angry gods, shredding homes, drowning fields, and turning roads into rivers. The rice you worked all season to plant? Now it's halfway to the ocean. Earthquakes? Completely unpredictable. One moment you're eating dinner, the next your house has rotated 90 degrees. Even if you survive the shaking, fire is waiting. Because everything, from homes to bathhouses, is made of wood. Floods are frequent. Too much rain and your village becomes a giant puddle. Crops rot, livestock wander off, and your landlord still demands taxes, sometimes with interest. Droughts aren't kinder. Weeks of merciless sun crack the land, shrivel rice fields, and leave everyone muttering suspiciously about whose well has water left. Winters? Less cozy snow days, more bone-deep misery. Heat came from clay braziers and thin blankets, so frostbite was basically seasonal fashion. And of course, Japan's volcanoes occasionally decided to erupt, showering everything in ash and lava. Your home becomes rubble, your shrine becomes a rock garden, and relief efforts? Forget it. There's no government safety net. You rebuild if you can. If you can't, you starve. In short, nature wasn't a scenic backdrop. It was an unpredictable neighbor that could ruin your life at any time. And while nature reminded you how small you were, the social ladder hammered it in. Power flowed downward like a waterfall, along with duty, taxes, and blame. Peasants obeyed the village headman. He answered to local samurai. They served the daimyo. The daimyo served the shogun. And the shogun occasionally bowed to the emperor, who didn't actually rule so much as exist in the capital wearing gorgeous robes. Even the samurai, with their swords and armor, weren't really on top. They dedicate their lives to serving a master, waiting endlessly for commands, and sometimes fighting in wars they didn't start, for lands they'll never own, in exchange for glory they'll never taste. On paper, they're revered. In practice, they're just extremely well-dressed middle managers swinging katanas. The daimi, mighty lords ruling provinces and armies, might look invincible, until the shogun decides they've gotten a little too ambitious. Suddenly, inspections show up at their castles, spies intercept their letters, and soon their heads are politely separated from their shoulders. Even the shogun, the so-called supreme warlord, lives surrounded by pressure, watching the court, the clans, the treasury, and at least 4 cousins secretly trying to lace his tea with poison. He rules, yes, but he doesn't exactly nap soundly. As for the emperor, he technically outranks every soul in Japan, but in reality, he has no real authority. Think of him as a sacred museum piece you must bow to, but never touch. He blesses rituals, names new eras, maybe writes a bit of poetry, while quietly being broke. The hierarchy isn't negotiable. You don't climb it. You're planted in place like a bonsai tree clipped into obedience. Ambition isn't admired, it's feared. The higher you go, the sharper the knives waiting in your shadow. Respect flows upward, orders crash downward. Commands aren't debated, they're endured. Suggesting you're above your rank isn't ambition, it's basically a death wish in ceremonial robes. So no matter your place, farmer, trader, warrior, or lord, someone above you holds your leash, and someone below is waiting for you to stumble. Learning in feudal Japan is tied completely to your social rung. Spoiler: near the bottom, the ladder is invisible, and sometimes on fire. Let's begin at the top. Samurai children. They're the lucky heirs. From childhood they're drilled in writing, swordplay, poetry, archery, etiquette, horseback skills, and the subtle art of keeping a blank, superior face. By 14, a samurai boy is expected to compose a death poem. You were still struggling with handwriting at that age. Their schooling is relentless, but with one goal: serve the clan and never bring it shame. They study Chinese texts, Bushido, and bowing so perfectly it could impress the gods themselves. Merchants and artisans get a simpler curriculum: math, ledgers, maybe a little reading, just enough to balance the price of dried turnips. Functional? Yes. Noble? Not so much. Peasant children? Education is replaced with survival. This is a hoe. That's rice. Now hurry, before the sun cooks us alive. Parents teach farming, obedience, and how not to collapse when the tax collector shows up. Books are rare. Schools are for the privileged. The only scroll you'll ever see is the one announcing your taxes have gone up, again. And girls? Unless you're highborn, your lessons are mostly sewing, household chores, tea rituals, and perfecting the art of being silent. If you're lucky, maybe you'll learn calligraphy or poetry, provided it doesn't distract you from folding laundry with holy precision. Education here isn't about curiosity. It's about molding you into a role, no questions asked. Learning for fun? That idea would have made your elders choke on their sake. Yes, knowledge is power, which is why the elite kept such a tight grip on it. Feudal Japan is stunning to look at. From the curve of a folding fan to the placement of a teacup, everything is crafted to dazzle the ancestors. But the beauty hides a catch: you can and will be judged for messing it up. Culture wasn't just decoration, it was performance, and mistakes carried consequences. Arranging flowers, pouring tea, folding a kimono, none of it was casual. The rules weren't casual suggestions, they'd been carved into tradition long before you were even born. Place one flower wrong, and suddenly the whole village whispers, and not in a flattering way. Take the tea ceremony, it looks calm and graceful, but in truth it's a tightrope of etiquette. Every bow, every turn of the cup, every pause must be precise. Too fast, too slow, too eager. Any slip risks exposing not just bad manners, but supposedly a flawed spirit handed down from your family line. Calligraphy? Not an art, but a trial of discipline. Each stroke of the brush is expected to mirror your inner balance. Write too sloppy and you're branded unstable, disrespectful, maybe even unworthy of trust. Even poetry was dangerous ground. A haiku wasn't just words, it had to be in the right season, on the proper paper, with metaphors delicate enough to show refinement but never too bold, too personal, or too clever. Fail, and you're quietly excluded from the moon viewing gatherings. Culture in feudal Japan was a constant test. You didn't perform it to relax, but to prove you were controlled, polished, and terrified of appearing unrefined. Beauty wasn't natural, it was armor wrapped in silk. One mistake in a flower arrangement or tea ritual, and all grace could collapse like a broken bonsai. After everything, the rigid ranks, the endless rituals, the suffocating honor, it's clear you wouldn't survive long in feudal Japan. Not because you're weak, but because life there wasn't built for ease. It was built for obedience. Every word, every bow, every gesture was judged. Fail, and you face shame, or sometimes worse. There were no breaks, no chances to just be yourself. You were born into a script and expected to perform flawlessly until death. A samurai carried not just a sword, but centuries of honor, and the looming duty to compose poetry before cutting himself open if he failed. Peasants bent their backs to the earth from dawn till collapse, at the mercy of weather and lords alike. Women were trained for silence, service, and sacrifice. Everyone else? Locked into their station with no escape. Yes, feudal Japan was stunning. Its temples, poetry, gardens, and rituals still inspire awe. But behind that beauty was a system so strict it crushed individuality. Speak too loudly, laugh at the wrong moment, step over the threshold with the wrong foot, or bow incorrectly, and suddenly you were seen as a threat to order. That was both its strength and its curse. Japan wasn't designed to be easy, it was designed to endure. And just when history seems rigid, a figure appears who breaks it. In a world where women were silenced and never dreamed of leading soldiers, Artemisia of Caria stood like an error in the record. A queen, a naval commander, and a strategist who defied every expectation, she took her seat among rulers and warlords in an era that insisted she shouldn't even exist. Artemisia ruled Halicarnassus, a city tucked along the rugged southwestern coast of Asia Minor, what we now call Turkey. On paper, she was just another client ruler under the vast Persian Empire. In reality, she was something far more dangerous. Her identity was complicated. Greek by heritage, Persian by allegiance, and a woman in a world ruled almost entirely by men. Each of those labels carried weight. Together, they made her an anomaly. Her father was likely Carian, her mother from the island of Crete. After her husband's death, instead of stepping aside for a male successor, Artemisia seized the throne. That was already a bold act of defiance. But she wasn't satisfied with ruling, she wanted power on the battlefield. So when Xerxes, the Persian king of kings, launched his massive invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, Artemisia did the unthinkable. She didn't offer prayers or supplies from the sidelines. She volunteered for war. She equipped 5 warships at her own expense, commanded them herself, and sailed straight into history. Even more astonishing, Xerxes, ruler of an empire stretching from India to Egypt, didn't dismiss her. He trusted her. He valued her. He listened. But make no mistake, her decision was controversial. A Greek queen fighting for Persia? To her fellow Greeks, it was treason in fine robes. She was branded a traitor, a mercenary, a woman who had traded her heritage for power at a foreign king's table. And yet Artemisia didn't flinch. She doubled down, carving out her place among Persia's top commanders. In council meetings, surrounded by hardened generals, she spoke with clarity, strategy, and brutal honesty. Where others fed Xerxes' flattery, Artemisia gave him truth. Before the pivotal Battle of Salamis, she warned him not to force a naval clash in the narrow straits. She predicted exactly what would happen. Persia's numbers would count for nothing, and disaster would follow. Xerxes ignored her. And history proved her right. Even among Persian allies, Artemisia unsettled the men around her. She wasn't a figurehead. She wasn't a token. She was a commander who gave orders, fought battles, and often outperformed her male counterparts. That kind of presence was hard to swallow for warlords who'd built their lives on conquest. Back in Greece, her reputation spread like wildfire. The historian Herodotus, himself from Halicarnassus, wrote about her with a mix of awe and suspicion. To some, she was a monster in armor. To others, a rare genius who thought like a man, and often better than most of them. Artemisia was many things: loyalist, strategist, traitor, visionary. But above all, she was a political animal who understood one truth better than anyone else. In war, identity bends. Only power endures. If there was ever a stage that tested Artemisia's brilliance and boldness, it was the Battle of Salamis. This wasn't just any clash. It was the naval showdown of the Greco-Persian Wars. A massive Persian fleet, confident, overcrowded, unstoppable on paper, squared off against a smaller, nimbler Greek navy in the narrow straits near Athens. And here, Xerxes' grand campaign would stumble. Long before the first oar struck the water, Artemisia had warned him. She told Xerxes plainly, "Don't fight here. The straits are too tight. The Greeks know these waters. Your numbers won't matter." But pride overruled reason. Xerxes wanted glory. What he got instead was disaster. The battle descended into chaos. Persian ships smashed into each other. Formations collapsed. Greek triremes sliced through the mess like sharks. It was a slaughter. And right in the middle of it all was Artemisia, commanding her flagship, surrounded on every side. That's when she made the move that would shock both allies and enemies for centuries to come. A Greek ship was hunting her down, closing fast. No escape. No hope. And then, her order, ram that Persian ship. Yes. She turned her prow not on her pursuers, but on one of her own allies, sinking a friendly vessel. The Greeks, stunned, assumed she must secretly be on their side. They broke off the chase. Artemisia slipped away untouched. From the hillside, Xerxes supposedly watched the entire scene. He turned to his advisors and said, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." It was perhaps the highest praise he ever gave a commander. Now, was it betrayal? Opportunism? Cold survival? Maybe all three. But what can't be denied is this: it worked. While countless Persian leaders died or fell into disgrace, Artemisia survived. More than that, she returned as one of the only commanders Xerxes still trusted. The Persians limped back from Salamis broken. Ships destroyed, morale shattered, the illusion of naval dominance gone. For most, it was the beginning of the end. For Artemisia, strangely, it was a rise. She had warned the king, acted decisively, and escaped unscathed. Back on land, Xerxes did something rare: he asked her advice. Not as a token queen, not as a novelty, but as his most reliable strategist. And Artemisia, true to form, told him exactly what no emperor wanted to hear: retreat. She urged him to leave Greece, to go back to Persia, and let his general Mardonius handle the rest. Athens had already burned. Victory enough. Don't tempt fate. And this time, Xerxes listened. The king who dismissed generals and ignored flatterers chose the hard truth of a single woman. Afterward, she was entrusted with something even greater: the guardianship of Xerxes' sons. In ancient courts, you didn't hand your heirs to just anyone. You chose someone unshakably loyal, politically sharp, and utterly dependable. Artemisia, the queen of a small city on the edge of empire, had carved her way into the heart of Persian power. She returned to Halicarnassus not as a ruler clinging to a throne, but as a legend of consequence. Her reputation began to grow roots. She was no longer just a monarch. She became the woman who stared down empires without flinching. Where others would have sought shelter in silence, Artemisia stepped into the storm of war and somehow returned stronger than before. While her exploits at sea gave her fame, her legacy was not anchored only to battles. It flourished also through the words of chroniclers, especially Herodotus, the so-called father of history, who, by coincidence, was born in Halicarnassus, the very city Artemisia ruled. This link made his account of her life feel strikingly personal. He wasn't writing of a distant tale, he was writing of his own queen. Yet Herodotus didn't frame her as a saint or a villain. He shaped her image into something rare in ancient texts, a ruler who was sharp, deliberate, and magnetic. His description of Salamis captures not only her daring, but her ruthless logic, the ramming of an ally, the escape in confusion, the brilliance wrapped in cruelty. In his telling, Artemisia becomes more than a commander, she becomes a paradox, admired and distrusted, celebrated and feared. Respect like that was never given freely. She thrived in the shadow of men, towering figures like Xerxes and Mardonius, yet somehow eclipsed them. While they drowned in arrogance, she rose on foresight. She knew when to strike and when to vanish. Wisdom like that is scarce, rarer still when embodied by a woman in an age that equated femininity with weakness. Perhaps that's what gripped Herodotus most. Artemisia defied every mold. She wasn't a rebel, though she defied orders. She wasn't a feminist, the idea didn't exist, but she cracked patriarchy with competence alone. Her legend spread not through statues or gilded temples, but through stories, echoes carried by men forced to admit she outmatched them. At councils, she outthought them. In combat, she outmaneuvered them. In politics, she endured when they fell. The mighty of her age needed scribes to keep their names alive. Artemisia had something greater. For when Herodotus set down his scroll and took up his pen again, he wasn't just writing history. He was inscribing a riddle in the figure of a queen. Curiously, her name did not die with her. A century later, it returned, borne by another queen, Artemisia II of Caria, likely a descendant, perhaps not, but a ruler who too left her mark on history. Unlike the first, this Artemisia never commanded fleets, but she carved her legacy into stone itself. Her claim to eternity, commissioning one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. She raised the marble tomb for her husband, Mausolus, who was also her brother, a reminder that dynastic politics were always tangled. Yet it was more than grief's tribute. It was a statement, a monument that projected identity and echoed the strength of her namesake. Scholars still argue their exact kinship, mother and daughter, aunt and niece, or merely sharers of a name. What is certain is that Artemisia had by then become shorthand for rule, intellect, and defiance. The first queen's image had seeped into the identity of Halicarnassus so deeply that successors wore it as armor. More fascinating still, the later Artemisia's great tomb gifted us the very word we use today for colossal memorials, mausoleum. A linguistic legacy, etched from grief, power, and politics. And though the second Artemisia is remembered for mourning, she also governed capably, continuing a rare thread of female authority in a corner of the ancient world where such power was anything but ordinary. But we can't overlook the fact that the roots of this story were planted by the first Artemisia, the fearless naval commander, the queen who stood beside Xerxes, the woman who straddled 2 worlds, both Greek and Persian. Without her, the name might have disappeared into silence. Halicarnassus could have been just another nameless city fading on a lonely coast. Instead, it became a symbol, a place where 2 remarkable women carved their marks into history. Not by luck, but through boldness. Their lives, separated by centuries, still echo together. One through the command of ships, the other through towers of stone, both carrying names history could never quite bury. Artemisia's tale has always existed in the margins, caught between empires, between identities, between myth and reality. Nowhere is this clearer than in how her memory has been debated, reshaped, and retold through the ages. Was she a Persian pawn, a Greek betrayer, or a sovereign strategist playing chess while others clashed with swords? To the Persians, she was a trusted admiral, one of the few who offered wise counsel and fought with distinction. Xerxes himself valued her judgment more than that of his veteran generals. That alone reveals her brilliance and composure under fire. In Persia, her loyalty was considered noble, even heroic. To the Greeks, the picture was murkier. Many branded her a traitor, a woman who turned her back on her Hellenic heritage to stand with an Eastern monarch. Yet even Greek writers, Herodotus most notably, couldn't help but respect her cunning and intellect. She embodied the contradictions of her age, proving not all Greeks sided with Greece, and not all Persians were enemies. She blurred the lines war tried to draw. Modern readers see her differently. Some cast her as a feminist symbol before the term even existed, others as proof of sharp leadership in a man's world. Her legacy fascinates, not because she conformed to the image of ancient queens, but because she shattered that mold entirely. In military history, she's still remembered as one of the few women to ever command fleets in antiquity. In politics and literature, she surfaces as a voice of reason against arrogance. And in popular culture, she reappears again and again, sometimes twisted, sometimes idealized, but always unforgettable. Here's the truth: Artemisia wasn't chasing legacy. Not in the way we think of it today. She wasn't curating an image or writing her story for future generations. She was surviving, ruling, and winning. That's why her story endures, not because of myth, but because of choices, tough ones, risky ones, and often the right ones. She wasn't Persia's. She wasn't Greece's. She was her own. As centuries passed, her image transformed, as all great stories do. She was no longer just a historical figure. She became legend, allegory, sometimes even monster. Writers and dramatists reshaped her at will. In some tales, she was cast as a ruthless temptress. In others, a bloodthirsty warrior queen. The true Artemisia, the strategist, the pragmatist, the survivor, was buried under layers of fantasy and fear. Much of this distortion came from one simple fact: men didn't know how to place her. A woman who commanded men, who stood firm in battle, who told kings they were wrong and proved it. That unsettled the ancient world. So, storytellers did what they often do with powerful women they can't explain: they rewrote her. One strange legend claims she died for love, hurling herself from a cliff after rejection. Not exactly the act of a hardened naval commander, but a convenient tale to reduce strength into tragedy. Another portrait turned her into a schemer, more sorceress than sovereign. It's a familiar pattern through history. When women rise through intellect and audacity, later generations either soften them into victims or twist them into villains. Artemisia's story has often been twisted, receiving both extremes of portrayal, yet neither reflects reality. The true Artemisia didn't lead through allure or superstition. She commanded with foresight, logic, and an icy clarity of strategy. She played within a man's world but refused to follow its rules, and succeeded. That, more than anything, unsettled later generations. Because if one woman could do it, why not many? Even now, depictions still warp her. Hollywood, for instance, reshaped her into a vengeful temptress in 300, Rise of an Empire. Entertaining? Maybe. Faithful to history? Not at all. Still, the very fact she continues to be reimagined proves something: her legacy bites. The woman feared by kings did not vanish, she transformed into legend, into memory, into an unspoken challenge history keeps raising. What if more women had been like Artemisia? When Artemisia of Caria slipped from the written record, she didn't disappear from history. Her impact rippled outward like the wake of her ships, long after her final voyage. No grand mausoleum bears her name. No sculpted likeness has survived. Yet her presence lingers, in the ruins of Halicarnassus, in ancient texts, and in debates among historians still trying to grasp how she achieved the impossible. Because Artemisia's life was impossible. She held power in an age that denied women rule. She fought battles when women were barred from war. She spoke when silence was demanded, and somehow, she was obeyed. She wasn't merely endured, she was respected. That respect, grudging as it was, may be her rarest triumph. To have lived as a woman in command and to have forced even enemies to acknowledge her skill, that is no small feat. Centuries later, her name remains both celebrated and concealed. She never reached the fame of Cleopatra or Joan of Arc, but perhaps that suits her story. Artemisia never sought legend, she sought results. She wasn't draped in mythic romance or tragic beauty. She was a strategist, a realist, a leader. Her stage wasn't a poet's verse but the cramped war deck, the hushed council chamber, the calculating gaze of a king who chose to listen. Today, her life is worth revisiting, not only as an account of a woman in a man's arena, but as proof that bravery doesn't always wear a crown or wield a blade. Sometimes it simply speaks the hard truth, takes the helm, and sails into the storm. Artemisia never asked to be saved. She never needed her story rewritten. What she needed, and still deserves, is remembrance, as she was sharp, bold, unyielding. In an empire dominated by men, she carved her course through hostile tides, cultural barriers, and the fog of war. And as long as ships sail and history honors those who dared when silence was safer, Artemisia of Caria will not be forgotten. Before telescopes, before satellites, before Copernicus dared rearrange the heavens, humanity relied on only two tools to read the sky, the naked eye and stone. And somehow, that was enough. Across the ancient world, people gazed upward not only in awe, but with purpose. The stars weren't decoration, they were calendars, compasses, gods, and omens. Thus began the oldest science of all, astronomy. Long before it carried that name, it was survival. Farmers read the heavens to know when to sow, sailors used the stars to chart their seas. Priests looked skyward to time their sacred rituals. And those who tracked the heavens, whether priest, mathematician, or king, were vital to every society. But without telescopes, how did they manage? They built in stone. Their temples weren't just shrines, they were instruments. Monuments like Stonehenge in Britain, Nabta Playa in Egypt, and the Great Pyramids of Mesoamerica were more than tombs or ceremonial sites. They were observatories, aligned with the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars. Many were crafted to capture precise shafts of light on solstices and equinoxes, turning stone into a cosmic calendar. Sacred monuments often doubled as celestial instruments. Take the vast temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak in Egypt. Its axis was aligned so the midsummer sun rose directly between its pylons. At Chichen Itza, the Maya raised El Castillo, where the equinox sun paints the illusion of a serpent sliding down the pyramid staircase. In India, the enormous stone observatories of Jantar Mantar allowed scholars to follow the shifting paths of planets and stars with remarkable accuracy. None of this was coincidence. None of it was guesswork. These were intentional, data-driven achievements of cosmic design. And they were widespread. From the Andes to the Nile, from Mesopotamia to China, people laid stone guided by starlight. They tracked planetary cycles, eclipses, even retrograde motion armed only with patience, persistence, and a belief in cosmic order. The heavens were not only gazed upon, but measured, mapped, and carved into the very foundations of their cities. Long before glass lenses revealed distant worlds, ancient builders had already etched the rhythm of the sky into stone, silent, precise, astonishing. On the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians gazed upward and saw not chaos but structure. By around 3000 BCE, they were not simply telling myths of the heavens, they were shaping daily life by them. To them, the sky was a calendar, a cosmic timetable to be read correctly. These early sky watchers laid the foundations of what we now call celestial mechanics. They noted the steady paths of the sun, moon, and wandering planets and recognized them as reliable cycles. That is why they created one of humanity's earliest calendars, based on lunar months. Imperfect, yes, but effective enough to guide farming and rituals. And in the same breath, they gave us the sexagesimal system, a base 60 method of counting that still governs how we divide hours and circles today. Each time you read 60 minutes on a clock or 360 degrees in a circle, you echo their thinking from 5,000 years ago. They lacked telescopes, but they had ziggurats, tiered towers reaching skyward. From these platforms, temple scholars scratched notes on clay tablets: the first appearance of Venus, the reddening of the moon in eclipse, the re-emergence of hidden constellations. They called themselves Amanu, learned ones, keepers of both knowledge and ritual. Over centuries, their traditions sharpened. The Babylonians, heirs to Sumerian records, expanded these notes into systematic star catalogs, eclipse tables, and constellations still known today. But it all began with Sumerian scribes pressing celestial data into clay. What stands out most is how seamlessly their science intertwined with their myths. For them, the heavens were divine yet decipherable. The gods moved with consistency, and by understanding those motions, one could harmonize harvests, ceremonies, and destiny. They did not simply marvel, they measured. In doing so, they sparked humanity's enduring relationship with the stars. If the Sumerians kindled astronomy's first flame, the Babylonians fanned it into brilliance. By 1800 BCE, Babylonian scholars were no longer just observers, they were predictors. Planetary alignments, eclipses, retrograde motion, all carefully logged and projected with stunning reliability. They were not speculating, they were calculating. They took the observational heritage of Sumer and amplified it with mathematics. On clay tablets like the Enuma Anu Enlil and the Mul.Apin, among the oldest astronomical texts we possess, line after line recorded when Venus would rise, how long it would glow, or when an eclipse was due. These weren't myths but raw data, the earliest almanacs. Perhaps most extraordinary of all, they recognized the Saros cycle, about 18 years in length, which let them forecast lunar eclipses centuries in advance. Deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, long before Europeans set foot in the New World, the Maya were building one of the most sophisticated astronomical systems the world had ever seen. For them, the sky was not just a map, it was destiny written in stars and cycles. The Maya tracked the motions of the sun, moon, Venus, and other celestial bodies with astonishing accuracy. Their astronomers calculated the solar year to within a fraction of a day of modern measurements, centuries before telescopes or mechanical clocks. They devised multiple interlocking calendars: the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, the Tzolkin, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Long Count, which stretched across thousands of years. Time wasn't just counted, it was layered, cyclical, alive. At Chichen Itza, they raised El Castillo, a pyramid aligned so precisely that during the equinoxes, light and shadow combined to reveal the image of a great serpent slithering down its staircase. This was no accident of stone and sun. It was cosmic theater, architecture designed to bring the heavens down to earth. Venus held special importance to the Maya, often linked with war, sacrifice, and divine cycles. They recorded its appearances and disappearances with such care that modern astronomers have confirmed their tables matched the planet's 584-day cycle almost exactly. To the Maya, when Venus rose, kings made war, priests made offerings, and entire cities moved in rhythm with a wandering star. What's remarkable is how seamlessly their science fused with myth. Astronomy wasn't separate from religion or politics. It was the spine holding their civilization together. Every stone monument, every glyph, every ceremony carried celestial weight. The heavens dictated when to plant, when to fight, when to crown a ruler, and when to appease the gods. Like the Sumerians and Babylonians before them, the Maya proved that with enough patience, enough records, and enough reverence for the sky, you could turn the universe into a clock. And though much of their knowledge was nearly lost to conquest and fire, the echoes remain, carved in stele, painted in codices, and encoded in the stones of their pyramids. Without metal tools, without wheels, and without telescopes, the Maya charted the paths of the sun, moon, planets, and stars with precision that still astonishes scholars today. For them, astronomy was not an academic pastime, it was the very backbone of society. Kings were seen as messengers of the cosmos, and every great ceremony or political act was aligned with the heavens. Solstices, equinoxes, eclipses, and the cycles of Venus weren't just observed, they were harnessed to validate authority. Among their greatest feats was the tracking of Venus. The Maya realized that the planet vanished and reappeared in a repeating cycle of 584 days, weaving this rhythm into their warfare, rituals, and calendars. The Dresden Codex, one of the rare surviving Mayan manuscripts, contains a Venus table that projects the planet's motions over centuries with an error of less than a single day. Their calendar system was equally astonishing. They created the long count, capable of measuring time across thousands of years, alongside the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar accurate to about 365.24 days, nearly identical to the modern value. Alongside it ran the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar, so that multiple cycles of time overlapped like interlocking gears. Their observatories were built not of glass domes but of stone ingenuity. At Chichen Itza, the El Caracol Observatory featured windows aligned with the rising and setting of Venus. The Pyramid of El Castillo produced the famous serpent of light and shadow crawling down its staircase during equinoxes, a living calendar carved from stone. The Maya weren't simply gazing upward, they were binding their entire civilization to the movements of the sky. Kings ruled by the stars, temples rose with the solstices, and wars were waged in step with the wanderings of Venus. They didn't just read the heavens, they stitched them into daily life. Meanwhile, in ancient China, astronomy was not a hobby of scholars but a pillar of government itself. The emperor, revered as the son of heaven, ruled by a celestial mandate, and if the stars signaled disaster, his right to reign could collapse. As early as 2000 BCE, Chinese astronomers were carefully recording eclipses, comets, novas, and planetary paths. Their chronicles, preserved in works like the Records of the Grand Historian and the Book of Han, are still cited today by modern scientists to confirm ancient cosmic events. One of their most extraordinary observations came in 1054 CE, when a brilliant new star flared in the sky, bright enough to be seen in daylight for weeks. They marked its position so precisely that modern astronomers later used their notes to identify its remnant, the Crab Nebula. But Chinese astronomy wasn't based on myth alone. They engineered armillary spheres, shadow-casting gnomons, and even elaborate water-powered celestial globes and clocks, centuries before similar devices appeared in Europe. They divided the heavens into 28 lunar mansions, akin to constellations, and built a lunisolar calendar that still underpins festivals like Lunar New Year. Eclipses held particular weight. Predicting them accurately was essential, for an unexpected eclipse was seen as a cosmic warning, and sometimes grounds to question the emperor's legitimacy. In China, the sky was not distant or decorative. It was interwoven with politics, ritual, and the very survival of the dynasty. The stars didn't just measure time, they revealed truth. And entire empires listened. In ancient India, astronomy was never an isolated science. It was fused with mathematics, philosophy, ritual, and metaphysics. Known as Jyotisha, the science of light, it began as a way to determine auspicious times for ceremonies but evolved into one of the most mathematically advanced traditions of the ancient world. The earliest traces appear in the Vedas, composed around 1500 BCE. These sacred texts describe the motions of the sun, moon, and planets, and divide the sky into 27 nakshatras, lunar mansions that became the backbone of Indian star charts. More than myth, they were used in calendars and astrological systems still followed today. What set Indian astronomy apart was its precision. Early scholars produced models of the solar year more accurate than Rome's Julian calendar centuries later. The Surya Siddhanta, compiled around 500 CE, described Earth's axial tilt, the elliptical orbits of planets, and even hinted at gravity long before Newton. Then came Aryabhata, perhaps the most brilliant of them all. In 499 CE, he proposed that Earth rotates daily on its axis, an idea rarely entertained elsewhere at the time. He calculated the length of the year at 365.358 days, astonishingly close to today's value, and pioneered advanced trigonometric functions to support astronomical work. Indian astronomers also embraced the decimal system, built shadow instruments and armillary spheres, and aligned observatories with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary conjunctions. But beyond the mathematics, there was a spiritual elegance. For India, the universe was not a machine to conquer but a rhythm to join. Astronomy expressed harmony with the cosmos, a geometry of spirit in which planets moved not just through the heavens, but through the soul. If India's sky watchers saw the cosmos as a cycle, the Greeks looked upward with a different question. Why? Why do the stars move? Why do planets wander? And can their motions be explained by reason alone? Greek astronomy marked a turning point. Others read patterns and omens, the Greeks searched for laws. They weren't only observers, they were theorists. It began with thinkers like Thales of Miletus, who argued that celestial events had natural causes, and Anaximander, who imagined Earth floating unsupported in space, surrounded by a cosmic sphere. These ideas were crude, but revolutionary for their time. Then came Pythagoras, who envisioned the cosmos as a harmony of numbers, a music of the spheres where mathematical ratios governed everything. His school set the stage for theoretical astronomy. The boldest leap came from Aristarchus of Samos, who in the 3rd century BCE proposed a heliocentric model, placing the sun at the center. His vision was ignored for nearly 2,000 years, but it planted a seed that would later blossom with Copernicus. Next was Hipparchus, the father of observational astronomy. He compiled the first star catalogue, ranked stars by brightness, discovered the precession of the equinoxes, and invented trigonometric methods to calculate positions, all without telescopes. And finally, Claudius Ptolemy, whose Almagest became the standard for over a millennium. His geocentric system, using deference and epicycles, was elegant enough to describe planetary motion, until new evidence proved it wrong. The Greeks weren't always correct, but their method was revolutionary. They proved the cosmos wasn't chaos. It was order, governed by patterns the human mind could uncover. With them, astronomy became more than observation, it became explanation. It became a dialogue between earth and heavens, between reason and legend, between what eyes perceive and what minds believe. Long before the telescope appeared in the 1600s, people had already spent millennia studying the sky with nothing more than shadows, stones, and human sight. What they achieved was nothing less than remarkable. They charted stars, followed planets, predicted eclipses, and built monuments aligned to solstices and equinoxes, all without glass, satellites, or electricity. Even more impressive, these feats were reached independently. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia, the Maya of Central America, the scholars of India and China, the Greeks and Egyptians around the Mediterranean, all developed astronomical systems shaped by their own cultures. And yet, oceans apart, they reached similar truths. The heavens move with order, and that order has meaning. Ancient astronomy was not hidden away in libraries. It guided farming, faith, architecture, leadership, and philosophy. It determined when to sow, when to worship, when to build, and when to rule. In every land, the sky was seen as a key to the divine, or at least a map to humanity's place in creation. Their models differed, some geocentric, some mythic, some cyclical, but they all held one belief: deep respect for the cosmos. To them, the sky was not a backdrop, it was alive, purposeful, and sacred. The telescope would later shatter old models. It showed moons orbiting Jupiter, the phases of Venus, spots on the sun, and galaxies far beyond ours. But that leap rested on the slow, patient work of the ancients, their records, alignments, and relentless curiosity. Even today, every time we check a calendar, use a star map app, or celebrate a solstice, we inherit their legacy. Every satellite, GPS, and space probe rests on foundations laid in clay, stone, and papyrus. They didn't know of black holes or cosmic radiation, but they asked the right questions. They looked up, and they noticed. In the silence of the night, they became the earliest scientists, writing their wonder into the sky. Because of them, we now look deeper, not only into the stars, but into ourselves. Then came 1803, when something unexpected shook the world. A young republic, barely 3 decades old, bought land so immense it doubled its borders in one stroke. The Louisiana Purchase was no simple deal, it was a geopolitical earthquake. With one signature, the United States gained more than 828,000 square miles, from the Mississippi to the Rockies. 13 future states would grow from that rich land. And the cost? Only $15 million, about 4 cents an acre. The surprise was that no one, not even American leaders, saw it coming. President Thomas Jefferson's only goal was access to the Mississippi and the vital port of New Orleans. The nation's farmers depended on river trade, sending goods southward, and whoever held New Orleans controlled their survival. Jefferson told his envoys to offer up to $10 million just for the city and a bit of nearby territory. But when they arrived, they were stunned. The French had a counter-proposal, not only New Orleans, but the entire Louisiana territory. Why? Napoleon Bonaparte had shifted his focus. His dream of a North American empire had collapsed after the Haitian Revolution. Disease, rebellion, and looming war with Britain made Louisiana a burden, not an asset. Napoleon needed money for battles in Europe, not endless swamps. Seizing the chance, the Americans agreed quickly, even before Jefferson's full approval. This wasn't just a purchase of land. It meant the Mississippi, the plains, the mountains, and control of the continent's heart. For Jefferson, it was more than territory, it was destiny, a canvas for expansion, growth, and eventual conflict. Newspapers cheered the deal, but one reality was overlooked. That vast land was never empty. The Louisiana Territory was already the homeland of many native nations, each with its own past, rivalries, and territorial claims. A treaty signed in Paris would not just redraw borders, it would reshape lives across a continent. At the center of this transaction stood a restless emperor with too many wars, Napoleon Bonaparte. By 1803, he was stretched thin, fighting battles in Europe, revolts in the Caribbean, and debts in his treasury. Then, in a move that stunned both allies and enemies, he offered to sell nearly a third of North America to the very republic he once hoped to contain. Just years earlier, France had secretly reclaimed Louisiana from Spain through the Treaty of San Ildefonso. Napoleon's dream was to rebuild a colonial empire, with Louisiana supplying food and livestock to Saint-Domingue, the jewel of the French Caribbean. France didn't covet Louisiana for its soil, it wanted the sugar. But that plan crumbled in fire and epidemic. The Haitian Revolution, led by formerly enslaved leaders such as Toussaint Louverture, erupted into a fight France could not win. Tens of thousands of soldiers were sent, only to perish by sword and by yellow fever. Napoleon lost his strongest general, his troops, and his chance at reclaiming the wealthiest sugar colony on earth. With Saint-Domingue slipping away, Louisiana no longer had purpose. Worse, it was indefensible. And with Britain preparing for renewed war, Napoleon feared the territory would be seized outright. So, instead of losing it, he sold it. True to his style, the choice was swift, daring, and practical. On April 11, 1803, he startled American envoys Robert Livingston and James Monroe with a proposal: the entire Louisiana Territory, not just New Orleans, for $15 million. Napoleon's reasoning was blunt: I have given England a rival who will one day humble her pride. He wanted more than cash. He wanted the United States strong enough to challenge Britain. Selling Louisiana wasn't surrender, it was strategy. With a single bargain, Napoleon abandoned an American empire and altered the future of a nation he barely valued. What for him was a discarded asset would become the springboard for U.S. expansion westward, and the beginning of the unraveling of native sovereignty. President Thomas Jefferson had long pictured a republic of independent farmers bound by liberty and civic duty. On paper, the Louisiana Purchase fulfilled that vision, but in practice, it gave him a constitutional dilemma. Jefferson believed the government could act only within powers granted by the Constitution. And nowhere did it say a nation could buy foreign territory. There was no clause for purchasing half a continent in one stroke. The bargain was almost unbelievable: $15 million for land stretching from the Mississippi to the Rockies. Yet Jefferson agonized. Could a leader who warned against federal overreach now bend the Constitution to justify such a vast purchase? Privately, he even considered drafting an amendment to authorize it. But time was short. Napoleon could change his mind, or Britain might seize the territory before negotiations ended. So Jefferson did something ironic. He embraced implied powers, the very idea he had once attacked in Alexander Hamilton's arguments. He framed the purchase as a treaty, which the Constitution allowed with Senate approval. In October 1803, the Senate ratified it with wide support. Jefferson, though uneasy, defended it as essential for the Republic's survival. The strict constitutionalist had just orchestrated the largest peaceful land deal in U.S. history. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, but Jefferson saw compromise as necessary to preserve liberty rather than endanger it. In doing so, he set a precedent. The federal government could acquire land by treaty, even without explicit constitutional authority. That logic would be repeated again and again as the United States pushed westward into lands already inhabited. The Louisiana Purchase was now official, but no one truly knew what had been bought. The region was immense, lightly mapped, and filled with unfamiliar rivers, mountains, species, and nations. In 1804, Jefferson commissioned an expedition that became legendary, the Corps of Discovery, led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their goals were ambitious: explore the new territory, establish relations with native peoples, catalog resources, and, above all, search for a passage to the Pacific. Jefferson dreamed of a Northwest Passage, a direct water route that would revolutionize trade. It didn't exist. But what the expedition uncovered would still redefine how Americans viewed the continent. Beginning in St. Louis in May 1804, Lewis and Clark led a crew of over 30 men upriver into lands untouched by American settlers. Along their route, they recorded more than 100 unknown animal species and nearly 200 new plants. They charted rivers, sketched mountain ranges, and filled journals with scientific notes and cultural observations that would shape the nation's understanding of its new frontier. The Louisiana Territory was already the homeland of many native nations, each with its own past, rivalries, and territorial claims. A treaty signed in Paris would not just redraw borders, it would reshape lives across a continent. At the center of this transaction stood a restless emperor with too many wars, Napoleon Bonaparte. By 1803, he was stretched thin, fighting battles in Europe, revolts in the Caribbean, and debts in his treasury. Then, in a move that stunned both allies and enemies, he offered to sell nearly a third of North America to the very republic he once hoped to contain. Just years earlier, France had secretly reclaimed Louisiana from Spain through the Treaty of San Ildefonso. Napoleon's dream was to rebuild a colonial empire, with Louisiana supplying food and livestock to Saint-Domingue, the jewel of the French Caribbean. France didn't covet Louisiana for its soil, it wanted the sugar. But that plan crumbled in fire and epidemic. The Haitian Revolution, led by formerly enslaved leaders such as Toussaint Louverture, erupted into a fight France could not win. Tens of thousands of soldiers were sent, only to perish by sword and by yellow fever. Napoleon lost his strongest general, his troops, and his chance at reclaiming the wealthiest sugar colony on earth. With Saint-Domingue slipping away, Louisiana no longer had purpose. Worse, it was indefensible. And with Britain preparing for renewed war, Napoleon feared the territory would be seized outright. So, instead of losing it, he sold it. True to his style, the choice was swift, daring, and practical. On April 11, 1803, he startled American envoys Robert Livingston and James Monroe with a proposal: the entire Louisiana Territory, not just New Orleans, for $15 million. Napoleon's reasoning was blunt: I have given England a rival who will one day humble her pride. He wanted more than cash. He wanted the United States strong enough to challenge Britain. Selling Louisiana wasn't surrender, it was strategy. With a single bargain, Napoleon abandoned an American empire and altered the future of a nation he barely valued. What for him was a discarded asset would become the springboard for U.S. expansion westward, and the beginning of the unraveling of native sovereignty. President Thomas Jefferson had long pictured a republic of independent farmers bound by liberty and civic duty. On paper, the Louisiana Purchase fulfilled that vision, but in practice, it gave him a constitutional dilemma. Jefferson believed the government could act only within powers granted by the Constitution. And nowhere did it say a nation could buy foreign territory. There was no clause for purchasing half a continent in one stroke. The bargain was almost unbelievable, $15 million for land stretching from the Mississippi to the Rockies. Yet Jefferson agonized. Could a leader who warned against federal overreach now bend the Constitution to justify such a vast purchase? Privately, he even considered drafting an amendment to authorize it. But time was short. Napoleon could change his mind, or Britain might seize the territory before negotiations ended. So Jefferson did something ironic. He embraced implied powers, the very idea he had once attacked in Alexander Hamilton's arguments. He framed the purchase as a treaty, which the Constitution allowed with Senate approval. In October 1803, the Senate ratified it with wide support. Jefferson, though uneasy, defended it as essential for the Republic's survival. The strict constitutionalist had just orchestrated the largest peaceful land deal in U.S. history. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, but Jefferson saw compromise as necessary to preserve liberty rather than endanger it. In doing so, he set a precedent. The federal government could acquire land by treaty, even without explicit constitutional authority. That logic would be repeated again and again as the United States pushed westward into lands already inhabited. The Louisiana Purchase was now official, but no one truly knew what had been bought. The region was immense, lightly mapped, and filled with unfamiliar rivers, mountains, species, and nations. In 1804, Jefferson commissioned an expedition that became legendary, the Corps of Discovery, led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their goals were ambitious: explore the new territory, establish relations with native peoples, catalog resources, and, above all, search for a passage to the Pacific. Jefferson dreamed of a Northwest Passage, a direct water route that would revolutionize trade. It didn't exist. But what the expedition uncovered would still redefine how Americans viewed the continent. Beginning in St. Louis in May 1804, Lewis and Clark led a crew of over 30 men upriver into lands untouched by American settlers. Along their route, they recorded more than 100 unknown animal species and nearly 200 new plants. They charted rivers, sketched mountain ranges, and filled journals with scientific notes and cultural observations that would shape the nation's understanding of its new frontier. They were not alone in the wilderness. Among the most important figures was Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman traveling with her French-Canadian husband. She was far more than an interpreter. Her presence with an infant marked the expedition as peaceful rather than hostile. Her knowledge of terrain and her skill in building trust with native groups proved vital for survival. Over the course of more than 2 years, the Corps covered over 8,000 miles, by river, horse, and foot. In late 1805, they finally reached the Pacific, built a winter fort, and made their way back by 1806. They hadn't uncovered a water route to the ocean, but they returned with something just as valuable: detailed maps, journals, and first-hand accounts of the landscapes and peoples of the newly purchased territory. Jefferson had bought a mystery. Lewis and Clark began to give it shape. Yet while their discoveries inspired visions of opportunity, they also carried a shadow, the warning of inevitable conflict with the indigenous nations whose homelands lay in the path of expansion. To settlers and politicians, the Louisiana Purchase was a treasure trove: fertile lands, room for towns, and boundless promise. To the native peoples who had lived there for generations, it was something very different: the beginning of an invasion. The treaty with France transferred land that was already the domain of more than 50 sovereign nations, each with their own languages, alliances, and traditions. The Osage, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Mandan, and many more had thrived there long before a French king or an American president claimed authority. But the deal was made without them. No consultation, no payment, no recognition. Overnight, they went from independent nations to obstacles in America's path. Jefferson imagined two futures for them: assimilation into American life or removal farther west, voluntary if possible, forced if not. In letters, he admitted that as white settlement advanced, native peoples would have to yield ground or face destruction. It was not yet called removal, but the idea had taken root. After Lewis and Clark returned with tales of rich soils and resources, pressure mounted. The government began pressing for treaties, often through coercion or deception, to push tribes off ancestral lands. Sometimes soldiers enforced these claims, sometimes epidemic disease cleared the way. Either way, the result was the same: steady erosion of native sovereignty. The Louisiana Purchase was the seed of what later became known as Manifest Destiny, the belief that America was fated to control the continent. The sale gave legal cover, but the true cost was borne by indigenous nations whose lands were divided, renamed, and repopulated without their consent. For them, this was not an acquisition, it was an intrusion. The map of North America was redrawn at their expense, erasing boundaries they had lived by for centuries. And the tide of settlers was only beginning to rise. On paper, the Louisiana Purchase was hailed as a triumph, a peaceful expansion that doubled the nation's size. But the reality was far messier. The promise of cheap land brought wave after wave of settlers, hungry for independence and prosperity. Behind them came soldiers, forts, and federal authority to enforce control. Two incompatible visions of the land collided. One saw it as property to be divided and cultivated, the other as a living resource to be shared and respected. Conflict was inevitable. Skirmishes escalated into wars. Treaties were signed and broken. And the frontier line pressed ever westward, carried by rifles, plows, and railroads. Yet it wasn't only native nations who faced upheaval. The vast new lands also reignited a dangerous question that would tear the United States apart: slavery. Southern planters saw an opportunity to spread their plantations deeper into the continent, ensuring that expansion was not just about freedom, but about bondage too. In the southern stretches of the new territory, crops like cotton and sugar promised immense profit, but only if worked by enslaved labor. This reality opened one of the most dangerous questions in American history: would slavery spread into the new lands? For decades, that debate consumed Congress, leading to the Missouri Compromise, widening rifts between North and South, and ultimately paving the road to civil war. The Louisiana Purchase did more than double the nation's size. It strained its political system almost to the breaking point. And the consequences weren't just political. The land itself was transformed. Rivers were dammed, prairies carved into farms, and the buffalo herds nearly driven to extinction. What had once been a living ecosystem, shaped by fire, migration, and indigenous stewardship, became a landscape fenced, parceled, and exploited for industry. America had acquired new land, but along with it, a moral and environmental burden that lingers to this day in battles over tribal rights, sovereignty, and reparations. Yet in 1803, the most immediate question was more practical: how do you govern such a massive expanse? The territory spanned what would become parts of 15 states, stretching from Louisiana to Montana and from the Dakotas to Colorado. At the time, it was an undefined wilderness: few settlements, fewer roads, and overlapping claims. The first step was to map it. Expeditions led by Lewis and Clark, Zebulon Pike, and others charted rivers and mountains, while surveyors and military engineers drew the borders that would later become counties, reservations, and state lines. For indigenous nations, this was more than mapping, it was erasure. Trails, seasonal hunting grounds, and sacred places were overwritten with straight lines and new names: Jefferson City, Baton Rouge, Fort Pierre. The land was no longer a shared resource but a commodity to be divided, sold, and governed. Congress imposed order through laws modeled on the Northwest Ordinance, organizing the purchase into territories overseen by federally appointed governors. When enough settlers arrived, a territory could apply for statehood, but not all borders were drawn fairly. Missouri, admitted in 1821, was the first state carved from the purchase, and it nearly tore the Union apart. Its request to allow slavery forced the nation to draw an imaginary line across the territory: slavery permitted to the South, banned to the North. That line became a fault line, haunting American politics until the nation finally fractured. Meanwhile, settlers rushed in, often ahead of the law. Some squatted on land, others benefited from government land grants. Native communities, even those with formal treaties, saw their homelands reclassified, first as federal territory, then as public land, and finally as private farms. With each stroke of a pen, the world they had built was being dismantled. The Louisiana Purchase was not just a territorial acquisition, it was a redefinition of the nation itself. In a single treaty, the United States transformed from a coastal republic into a continental power, reaching toward the horizon of its own ambition. It was the first great leap toward manifest destiny, before the phrase even existed. And it set a pattern the country would repeat again and again, from Florida to Texas, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii. The United States was no longer just a nation, it was becoming a land empire, always hungry for what lay beyond the horizon. Out of the Louisiana Territory grew a powerful new myth: the American frontier. It inspired tales of fearless explorers, homesteaders carving a life from wilderness and boundless opportunity. Yet those same stories carried a darker side. Every acre gained by settlers was a loss for native peoples: lands taken, treaties ignored, and whole nations pushed from their homes. The economic stakes were enormous. The Mississippi River turned into the lifeline of American trade, fueling the rise of cities like New Orleans, St. Louis, and Kansas City. Rich prairies became fields of wheat and cotton, while later discoveries of gold, silver, and minerals accelerated industrial growth. The purchase supercharged America's prosperity, but also exposed its contradictions. On the surface, it embodied ideals of freedom, expansion, and opportunity. Beneath that surface lay slavery, dispossession, and imperial ambition. It was triumph painted over tragedy. Today, highways, farmland, and suburbs crisscross the same ground once roamed by bison and stewarded by native nations. Sacred spaces became commercial fields, rivers became shipping lanes. Yet under the soil, the memory of the purchase persists. It was more than a real estate deal, it was a turning point. The young republic on the Atlantic coast had begun its transformation into a continental power. The treaty was signed in Paris, but its effects stretched across centuries of American life. For the United States, the Louisiana Purchase symbolized possibility. It gave the nation confidence that expansion was both natural and inevitable. That belief hardened into manifest destiny, pushing the U.S. all the way to the Pacific and, eventually, beyond. But expansion came at a devastating price. Native communities endured forced removals, broken treaties, shattered cultures, and mass violence. Bison herds vanished, languages and traditions were nearly erased, and indigenous nations were confined to shrinking reservations. Even so, the purchase left a layered legacy. It built cities, economies, and transportation networks that powered modern America. It opened space for migration, innovation, and reinvention. But its shadow is unavoidable. It became the model for conquest, displacement, and resource extraction. The Louisiana Purchase remains both a victory of diplomacy and a blueprint for loss. It is a paradox: growth entwined with grief, ambition tangled with amnesia. The United States was remade by it, and so was the world. But the central question lingers still: how do you honor land taken without consent, and a past that can never truly be restored?